Лекція на тему української ідентичності та розуміння українського питання в глобальному контексті. Доктор Томас PRYMAK сьогодні дає лекцію на запрошення Українського дослідного інституту «Ucrainica» в Українському культурному центрі OMNI Торонто. Розкажіть, що найцікавішого сьогодні почують глядачі вашої лекції?
Сьогодні ввечері я говорю про українців в Канаді, історія українців в Канаді і канадська політика щодо совєтська, радянська Україна. That is the dissatisfaction of Ukrainians within the Soviet Union, in particular regarding national independence. Шановні пані і панове, I'll be speaking tonight, as you've heard, about Canadian ethnic politics and Canadian policy toward the USSR's Ukrainian question, as I call it. Now, I'd just like to precede my formal presentation with a brief number of slides to give you some background to this subject. The first immigration of Ukrainians came to Canada from the province of Galicia, Crown Land it was called, in the Austrian Empire, and they settled in Western Canada. This map is taken from the Encyclopedia of Ukraine, and it shows where the Ukrainians actually moved to when they came to Canada, where they settled, and they settled in this large arc all across the western prairies because they're primarily farmers. They were peasants in the old country, villagers, Soljane, and they mostly settled on homesteads. Я канадський українець третього покоління тут в Канаді. Мої предки приїхали до Канади перед Першою світовою війною. Вони були так звані піонери на заході Канади. Homesteaders, селяни з Галичини, і в Канаді стали homesteaders, і друге покоління жили в місті Вінніпег на Манітоба. Там я народився і вирос там, дістав бакалавріат і master's degree в університеті там, University of Manitoba. Потім пішов тут, в Торонто, і дістав докторат. Моя докторська праця була політична біографія Михайла Грушевського. Це була перша українська дисертація, українська історія в цій університеті в Канаді. І ця біографія була перша повна наукова біографія Грушевського. Це було вже 40 років тому. The Canadian government wanted skilled agriculturalists to settle Manitoba and the Northwest Territories, which had always been sparsely populated, and the native inhabitants of which had been devastated by the introduction of new European diseases to which they had no immunity. Now, as well as this, there was a problem with the United States, which was looking across the border with envy at those empty lands on the prairies. The United States had a strong expansionist policy, and at that particular time was actually at war with Spain and would annex Spanish territories in the Caribbean and the Philippines as well. So that was going on at that time, and it had a history before that of annexing Mexican lands and before that Alaska. So the British government and the government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier here in Canada were a little bit afraid that the Americans would seize Western Canada if it were completely empty, and they welcomed these settlers to the country.
you're living with your husband, who is the third generation Ukrainian, and I was wondering, how does it look like for you? Like, do you have any Ukrainian traditions in your family? I know that your kids studied in Ukrainian school, so could you please just tell a little story of your family?
Yes, my children went to Ukrainian school, which was called Joseph Cardinal Slipe, and from kindergarten to grade 8, and they learned Ukrainsku mova at school, and then and also my son, I sent him to Ukrainian dancing, so he was dancing for 6 years, and he performed in the Ukrainian dancing group. He performed in many places. I think at concerts, Ukrainian dancing concert, and then so they went all the way to grade 8. Ukrainian school, so they learn language, and I actually helped them with the Ukrainian homework, because I went to Kiev. I went to University, Taras Shevchenko University in Kiev for 2 months in the summer, during summer, and that's where I learned Ukrainian language. I took elementary Ukrainian language and at university, and then I got a certificate in Ukrainian language, and I was actually interviewed in Ukraine as the only Iranian who went to Ukraine to learn the language. Wow. So they were very impressed. So I got my certificate. When I spoke, I gave a speech in Ukrainian language, Dorhe Vekladechi, like Dobry Den, Dorhe Vekladechi, I addressed my teacher, and so I gave a speech in Ukrainian, and then I got the Ukrainian certificate from Taras Shevchenko University. So from then on, I was able to help my children, my boys, with the Ukrainian homework at school. So that's how I raised them. So definitely their identity is Ukrainian and Persian.
Diefenbaker was criticized by officials in the Department of External Affairs, which was the Canadian Foreign Ministry. That's what it's still called today. These unnamed officials strongly discouraged any mention whatsoever of the national question and the Ukrainian question in particular that Khrushchev had faced across his entire career, and which only recently had nearly cost him his life at the hands of NKVD chief Beria. But those Canadian officials seem to know nothing whatsoever about such matters. At the same time, Diefenbaker, attuned as he was to the Ukrainian question, could clearly see through Khrushchev's ploy and was resolved to expose it and turn the whole decolonization question against the Soviet Union itself. The relevant parts of his speech read as follows. I turn now to the subject dealt with at great length by the chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, Nikita Khrushchev, on the subject of colonialism. He asked for and advocated a declaration at this session for the complete and final elimination of colonial regimes. I think it could be generally agreed that whatever the experience of the past, there can no longer be a relationship of master and servant anywhere in the world. He has spoken of colonial bondage, of exploitation and foreign yokes. Those views, uttered by the master of the major colonial power in the world today, the USSR, followed by the admission of 14 new members to the United Nations, all of them former European colonies, I pause to ask this question: how many human beings have been liberated by the USSR? Do we forget how Hungary, one of the post-war colonies of the Soviet Union, sought to liberate itself 4 years ago? And with what results? I say that because these facts of history in the Commonwealth and other countries invite comparison with the domination over peoples and territories, sometimes gained under the guise of liberation, but always accompanied by the loss of political freedom.
Який спогад про ваших українських родичів, дідусів, бабусів, батьків вам найбільше запам'ятався з вашого дитинства?
Наша родина була типічна для першої хвилі в Канаді. Перша хвиля була економічна хвиля. Grandparents in general говорили по-українськи з їх дітей. І ці діти, друге покоління говорили по-англійськи до нас. Наприклад, я, внук, і більшість там на заході Канади. Це була велика різниця між перша і друга хвиля. Друга хвиля після Другої війни, вона була політичні діячі і скитальські, they used to say. Тут в Канаді. І вони говорили дуже добре по-українськи, but they had a higher education and they were, so they spoke, вони говорили більше по-українськи з їх дітей. І тепер ми маємо п'ята імміграція після ще інша війна. І ніхто не знає тепер, що буде з історією українців в Канаді from now on. But we'll find out eventually.
Lester Pearson paid less attention to the Ukrainian question, and the old attitudes of indifference returned. But his successor, Pierre Trudeau, moved from indifference to an admiration of the USSR, and even declared that Canada could use Soviet models. Ukrainian Canadians opposed this, and on the eve of Kosygyn's state visit to Canada, the Prime Minister tried to mollify that community with his new policy of multiculturalism. Most Ukrainian Canadians reacted enthusiastically, but this did not quiet opposition to Trudeau's soft-on-Russia positions. Brian Mulroney was personally sympathetic to the Ukrainian Canadians and named more Canadian ethnics to responsible government posts. Ray Natishin became Governor-General of Canada and remained so when, in variance to American policy, Canada was the first Western state to recognize Ukrainian independence. Consequently, the general picture is one of increasing Ukrainian-Canadian influence and more sympathy towards the USSR's Ukrainians, ending with good relations with newly independent Ukraine. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Українська ідентичність живе в ділах і справах тих, хто навіть в третьому поколінні ідентифікує та розуміє себе справжнім українцем. Роксолана Буяк, Костянтин Сніцар, Форум ТВ, Торонто.